and you'll be faced with a lovely,
sometimes a little bit long,
online form.
I know, it's scary.
Test.
Hello guys, it's Manny, welcome back and welcome to my channel. So today's video is a very
Highly
requested video. I've been getting so many DMs through my Instagram, I've been getting so many messages through my LinkedIn, on my comments section on YouTube, and it's to basically do a video helping you guys out as to how you prepare for applying for spring weeks, how to maximize your chances of landing in spring week in one of those top companies, you know. Getting into the finance industry is so competitive nowadays that you almost kind of have to start early, and straight from the get-go, once you start university, first year is a really good idea to get one of these spring weeks. And just a little introduction as to what a spring week actually is, even though most of you watching this probably already know. It's essentially a 1 week kind of insight. It's not really an internship, it's an insight into a company that you've applied for, into a particular team that you've applied for. So most of the time these spring weeks are in either investment banking, global markets, they can also be sometimes in marketing as well, and they can be in things like wealth management. So you kind of pick your team when you apply to a particular company, and the spring week you'll be spending time with that team in the office and basically have the opportunity to network with employees and just gain an insight and answer two very important questions. Do you like working in that company, like what it's like to work in that company? And also the second one, is that team a good team for you? Do you see yourself being able to work in that team in the long run? Do you think you'd enjoy it? You get a lot out of it? Is it challenging enough for you? Is it the kind of fast-paced environment that you really like? And it's just a really good insight to get before you maybe apply for internships in second year, so you already know kind of what you like and what you don't like before you go in, you know, full steam ahead into a particular job. So spring weeks are really important. Even if you don't actually end up getting one, I think they are still really valuable to apply to in first year, because it gives you a really good insight into how the application process actually is, what to expect from different companies in the application process. So even if you don't actually get to spring week, you still would go through the application process and you'd be more prepared, or I guess you would know what to expect more in second year when you're applying for summer internships. So it'll kind of give you a head start-ish in a way. So please do not be disheartened if you don't get a spring week in the end. It's still a huge learning experience and a really valuable learning experience. So a little bit of background about me and spring weeks. First year of university, I obviously started applying for spring weeks because I had that same mentality that I just talked about. I didn't really care as much if I didn't get one. Obviously I'd be over the moon if I did, but I was more looking towards kind of getting a feel of the application process in itself. However, in the end, I actually managed to secure 5 spring weeks. So they were in Bank of America, which I've already filmed my experience about that, and you can check it out up here. I'll leave the link or down below in the description box. I also got accepted onto the spring week at Jefferies, and that was for equity. And my third spring week was Barclays, and this was in the wealth management division. I also got a spring week at Deloitte, which is called Spring into Deloitte, and this was a bit more of a general spring week. You didn't get to pick exactly what team you wanted to work in or gain an insight in. You kind of got an insight into all the different teams, and I kind of liked this in a way that you could get a feel for everything. You know, there wasn't that pressure of when you were applying, oh no, I had to pick a particular team. Like, you had a more varied kind of insight, so I quite like that. And finally the last one was American Express. This was more just finance related spring week, their finance team. So yeah, I got 5 spring weeks in the end, and if you have more specific questions for each one of those, please leave them down below in the comments, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll leave it down below in the description box as well, and you can just send me a message through there and I'll happily answer more specific questions to do with a particular company. So with spring weeks, there's a lot of different, I guess, sections to it, a lot of different prep work that needs to be done, because there's an application process and there's different stages to that application process, which is why I've decided to kind of make this a series, a mini spring week series on applications. So I'm going to be making a total of 3 videos. This will be my first video out of this series, and here I'll just be talking about the basics. So what is the actual application process and what little things you can do to start prepping before you actually apply, so you just have everything ready to go for the online application process. So that's going to be this first video. My second video, I will be talking a bit more in depth about what you can do to your CV or your cover letter to make it really convincing and persuasive, and just to really boost your chances of landing a spring week. And the final video is going to be just me talking about how to prepare for spring week interviews, because there are video and telephone interviews most of the time in these application processes. So I'll just be going through how you can actually prepare for both types of interviews, kind of what are the most common questions that I've seen in spring week interviews, and I'll just go through those, what you should expect from them, and so forth. But without further ado, let's get this first video started on what the actual application process is and what you can do to start prepping for your spring week applications. Get your applications in early, because that is absolutely vital. So for the first section, I'll be going through the application process. Now, from my experiences, all spring weeks start with the same format of application process. You basically go on their website, go on spring weeks, and then just go apply now, and you'll be faced with a lovely,
Sometimes a little bit long,
online form. So this online form, you basically put in your basic details, you know, it's just your name, university you go to, what secondary school you went to, your grades, these kind of things. You have to upload your CV as well, and not all of them, but some do ask for a cover letter as well. I think Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, especially those two, they ask for a cover letter, Credit Suisse as well. So you have to have your CV ready to go and a cover letter template kind of ready to go as well to apply for those. And it's just all online, like an online form, and you just submit all your details and you click send. So that is the first stage. Now, after that first stage of the online application process, they should send you an email saying what the next stage is. Now, most of the time this next stage is actually a test.
I know, it's scary.
But this is just kind of to get to grips with your numerical ability, your kind of verbal reasoning, and it also kind of gives you a situational test. So this is just to see if you match quite well with the company's culture, what they expect you to do, or how they expect you to act in a particular situation. This is what these tests do. I personally didn't over-revise for these tests. I didn't over-prepare for these tests. No, they don't really want you to. They kind of want to see what your ability is straight off the bat, you know, your natural ability, because essentially that's what's gonna come through if you work for them, you know, just your natural ability that comes to you straight away. You're not gonna have time to, for example, revise a problem in a company. If it comes up and you need a solution right there, right then, you're not gonna have time, you know, to look in a book or something. The answer's not gonna be in a book for you to then come up with a solution. So yes, you can prepare for these sorts of tests online. I'll have it linked down below. I think the brightnetwork.com has some practice tests of these, and they just sort of test how good of a problem solver you are, how good of a quick thinker you are. So the numerical tests, they usually need a calculator, or sometimes not. Usually quick sums, quick problem solving sort of questions. They give you some data, and then they say, for example, what percentage of people like this colour, and then you have to kind of take that data that they give you and then turn it into percentage and then give your answer. But however, these tests are usually timed, so yes, the questions may be easy, so to speak, but because they're timed, you have to think super quick, and that timing aspect is really important to practice, because that can make you make really silly mistakes even though the questions are quite easy. So in terms of preparing for these tests, I would say you don't necessarily need revision of, you know, your basic math skills. Everyone has them, but it's more the timing aspect. You need to practice the timing aspect, because that at the end of the day is what's going to make this slightly harder, I think. So that's a numerical kind of test. Then you've got the verbal reasoning. This is more of you know, wordy kind of answers. So you have a text which you have to read really quickly. You're also timed for this one. You have to read through that text really quickly and try not make mistakes as you read it, and try and comprehend it as you read it, because then you need to read the question and answer really quick, you know, from that text, and this just kind of tests to see if you actually understood what you just read. So you have to be really attentive. You can't just kind of skim read, you know, you need to absorb all that information to be able to answer correctly and accurately within the time limit. Now finally, The last sort of test that they do is situational judgment tests. So they tend to give you a sort of scenario, or maybe they might even have a little video clip that they do which shows a normal day-to-day in the office, and perhaps a problem comes up in that video or a scenario, and then they ask you to rank 1 to 5 out of the options that they give you. What would you most likely do to what you would least likely do? So you have to rank the 5 things that they do, you know, that could be your action, from 1 to 5, and you do those for a couple of questions. Now the situational judgment test doesn't tend to be timed. Actually, they do give you however much time you want, you can spend on it thinking about it and just fill it out. However, they do tend to be slightly longer, so it's still not good to spend a lot of time per question because you'll be there forever. So it should come naturally to you, your first initial answer that you would give to that problem, and just kind of put that number 1 and then work your way down to number 5, which is your least likely. Now most companies do this kind of format. However, I have seen particularly the kind of big 4 companies, so PwC or Deloitte or EY, they have a slightly different way of testing you, which is perhaps a bit more of a fun way. They do this test through a sort of game. PwC actually wants you to download a particular app that's kind of a game, and you do all the games on there. So I think, if I remember correctly, there's one where you have to hold down a balloon for a particular amount of time, and and the aim of the game is basically for you not to pop the balloon at the end. Stuff like that, you know, it's like little games. It'll take you about an hour, I think, to complete the game. But yes, this second section, which is the test section, there's loads of things online that will link down below, as I said, just to practice them, and it's mainly the timing aspect, I would say. Now usually after this kind of test stage, you have your video interview and then you have a telephone interview. So here's where the interviews come in. Now the video interview, most companies use this other company called HireVue, which is essentially where you record yourself answering pre-written or pre-recorded questions. So you normally have a screen and you can see yourself in a tiny little screen on one side of the page, and on the other side of the page you have the question that they're giving you. And how it works is that you have a particular amount of time to read that question that they're giving you, and you have a particular amount of thinking time as well. And once that time is over, you have a countdown from 3, 2, 1, and then it will start recording, and you just have to say your answer to that question, that interview question, and record yourself. Now you only have one shot at this, so you know you can't re-record yourself or anything like that, so you have to use that thinking time wisely that they give you. Make sure you read the question, make sure you understand the question before you go on and record it. Now most companies, I think, have from 3 to 7 questions that you have to record yourself like that, and it's so important when you're doing these video interviews to dress appropriately. You know, dress like you were actually going to a face-to-face interview. Just a smart shirt, perhaps. You don't even have to wear a tie, just make sure it's buttoned up to the top, or some sort of formal attire that you would wear to a normal interview, and treat that video interview, that recorded interview, as if it was face-to-face. And make sure you dressed appropriately, because when you dress appropriately you kind of get into that zone, you know, and you tend to do better. I felt like I tend to do better when I was fully dressed in all formal. So that's what you should expect from these kind of video interviews. Now when it comes to the telephone interview, well, that's the clues in the name. They call you up, they usually ask you to book a slot, I think a time slot, so it'll work around your timetable, you don't have to miss any lectures or anything for it, and they'll just call you up, and it will begin like if it was a face-to-face interview, except you can only hear the person's voice. Now the person who calls you up, it could be either a recruitment person, someone from HR, or I always seem to get someone really high ranking actually from the company who calls you up, and they're usually from the team that you applied for. So I applied for example, in Bank of America, the investment banking team, so I got someone from that team interviewing me and asking me a couple of questions. You know, it didn't feel too much pressure, you know, it's kind of a relaxed conversation between each other. It tends to be about 15 to 20 minutes. However, I did do some telephone interviews that were about an hour and a half. I think that was the BP one. So just be aware that the time period does range. Now after all these stages are completed, you will then get your offer, or not an offer, which is not the end of the world. As I said before, it would have still been a huge learning experience from this. So that is essentially the application process in itself for most companies. However, some companies do do it a little differently and perhaps have less steps than going through the long method, which is the video interview and the telephone interview. They have a sort of online assessment center instead. So after the test that you do, they have an online assessment center which takes about 2 hours to complete, and it's made up of 4 different sections. So the first section is usually a situational judgment test again. Then you have an area where it's kind of a mini video interview sort of stage within that. Then you have another section, and here they tend to give you a problem and they give you data in order for you to analyze to be able to solve that problem. And you have to kind of put yourself in the shoes that you're actually working there already and working in that team, and you have to come up with a solution, and then you have to record yourself with the solution that you come up with after you've analysed all that data that they have given you, and you say why you think this is the best solution from that data, and you just explain yourself almost as if you're having a meeting with your manager in a normal day at the office, and you're just explaining to them what you think is best that the team should do to come out of this problem. However, this is all timed, I must say. They do not give you a lot of time at all. I think about 8 minutes to not only read the problem but also analyze the data, come up with a solution, and almost come up with a mini presentation in your head, and then you record yourself. Apart from this, you also get different tasks, like for example, someone has sent you this email, you have about 5 minutes to read that email and send them back an email as well, and that email cannot include any errors in spelling or grammar. You know, it has to be a concise email, really formally worded as well, and this is all timed, so it's quite difficult, but it's sort of an online assessment kind of thing. And the companies that I know do this are Barclays and Deloitte. Those two are kind of the only ones that I applied to, at least, that have this sort of online assessment center. So that is it for this first section of the video about the actual application process and what to expect at each stage. Now, moving on to the next part is what little things you can actually do to be prepping before you even apply. Now here I just have very brief, short little bullet points. Basically, have an Excel spreadsheet where you kind of put the names of all the companies that you're applying to and all the different stages of the process, which I have just mentioned, and here you can put yes or no if you completed that process or that stage for that particular company. And this is just a really good way of keeping track of where you actually are in your application process, so you don't forget a deadline if you had to do something for a deadline, because they usually give you about 5 days or so to complete either the video interview or complete an online assessment center. They give you about 5 days there. So it's really good to just have an Excel spreadsheet just to keep organized and where you are in all your application process. Another really good tip is to have a sort of cover letter template ready to go. Yes, you most definitely have to fine tune it and alter it to every company that you do. You can't just copy and paste the same cover letter for all of them, because it will sound very generic. It will sound that you haven't really taken your time to read about the company and made it kind of personalized to them when you apply. However, having a template saves a lot of time. You know, you can still reuse a couple of words and sentences, or the structure of the template you can always use it time and time again, and just kind of change some of the details in there, make it more personalized. So having a cover letter template ready to go is really, really good and saves you a whole bunch of time. Another thing is having your CV up to date and ready to go as well. This is really, really helpful, as in every single online form, which is the first stage of the application process, as I said, you are going to be asked to submit your CV. So it's always really good to have this ready to go, and also in PDF format, because yes, they do accept other formats such as Word documents and so forth. However, I find that with Word documents, things can move around when you upload it, and it's just, you know, it might get a bit messy on the page. So it's always good to have it in PDF format. So that's the end of the video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you still have any other questions about the application process, and I'll happily answer them all down in the comments below. Please stay tuned for part 2, which is where I'll be going a bit more in depth as to actually how you should go about making your CV nice and neat, and how you should go about making a good cover letter template. So make sure to stick around for part 2, and thanks for watching.